Hello, this is Mr. Bowden again, and I am reading from 50 Minerals That Changed the Course of History. Today is the second mineral, the third chapter, the first one being diamond, and the second now being copper. The Stone Age lasted 2.6 million years, but once humans had established their first permanent settlements, they began to exploit a new material to make their tools, weapons, and ornaments: copper. Unlike stone, which is plentiful and available to all, copper had to be mined, or traded, and its working created a caste of specialist coppersmiths and a class of wealthy and powerful men and women who could afford to commission and purchase metal artifacts. The next section is called The Iceman Cometh. Here's a picture of an Iceman. On September 19, 1991, when two German tourists hiking on the high alpine glaciers on the border between Italy and Austria took a shortcut away from the marked track, they came across a deep gully in which they saw something that they first took to be some rubbish discarded by an earlier visitor. As they got closer, however, they realized the object was a human head and upper torso sticking out of the ice. The corpse was so well preserved that the hikers and the mountain rescue team and police who attended the scene thought that it was a modern fatality, a lost hiker who had met an unfortunate end in the treacherous Alps. It was only when the body had been removed from the ice and taken to the local morgue that the authorities realized the corpse, soon to be named Otzi, named for the Ots Valley where he was found. The corpse was the mummified remains of a man who had lived in the area some 5,300 years ago, or 33 BC. Sorry, 3300 BC. That was during a period of European prehistory known as the Chalcolithic, or the Copper Age. The Chalcolithic occurred between the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. Remember, the New Stone Age was the Neolithic, and it was between 10,000 and 7,000 years ago. And the Bronze Age we'll get to in the next chapter. The Chalcolithic is defined as the period when humans discovered how to work copper while they continued to use stone tools or implements. During the Neolithic, humans developed a sedentary lifestyle based on agriculture and communal life in towns and villages. Sedentary means that they sit a lot. Maybe they're up a lot working, but they stay in one place over the course of the year. Now, this presented them with new opportunities and difficulties. Among the latter was how to obtain foodstuffs and raw materials not available in their immediate vicinity. The answer was the development of the first trading links between different communities and cultures. Among the advantages settlement brought were an increase in living standards and leisure time, which is the basis of culture. It allowed the development of new technologies, the most important of which was metallurgy, how to shape metals. Archaeologists point to the Chalcolithic as the period when social stratification began in human societies. Compared to stone, copper was more difficult to source and to use. It had then to be reworked by specialists who might have been leaders themselves as a result of their expertise, or sold what they made to an elite of powerful and wealthy individuals. The copper on its own did not create social divisions, but it promoted certain trends initiated by human settlement. So the possibility was always there inside the way humans' nature is, but it didn't come out until the technology was there. Now, from his clothing and equipment, archaeologists believe that Otzi the Iceman was a high-status individual, possibly a chieftain or a coppersmith. Typically for the period, he carried both a fine flint dagger, flint is a kind of sharp stone, which was imported from Italy, and he also carried a metal axe. The axe is 23.5 inches in length and has a cast copper blade 3.7 inches long. In its own right, this axe is a weapon, but it could also cut down a tree in 30 minutes without getting dull, without blunting. The Cyprus connection is the second and last section of this. In antiquity, the island of Cyprus was one of the most important sources of copper in the Mediterranean world. Hence the Latin name for the metal is Cyprium, which is the metal from Cyprus, the Cypriot metal. Now that later got abbreviated to cuprum, and that's where we get our word copper. It's also why the element symbol for copper in the periodic table is Cu and not Co. Now there are several reasons why copper, along with gold, was one of the first metals to be worked by humans. It is extremely plentiful on Earth. It's the eighth most It's the eighth most common metallic element in Earth's crust. It's found in several rock ores, and unlike most metals, which are gray, copper has an attractive red, yellow, or orange hue, and when corroded, the green caused by a patent of copper carbonate. Lastly, it's also found in pure form on the ground as native copper, sometimes. Now, although native copper supplies were soon exhausted in the most populated areas, it was easily worked into small objects by cold hammering. You didn't have to use big factories or any other tools to do it. This is the start of tools. You take a stone tool and you can hammer the copper into something useful. Then you can use that as a tool to shape the other things. Although it was once thought that copper working was discovered in the Near East, in that area around Israel and Palestine I mentioned yesterday, and exported to Europe, archaeological evidence has shown the technology was developed independently in the Near East, in Europe, as well as in other parts of the world. Again, the idea for it just needed to be spread. You didn't need to train people and send them out. But the idea, this rock in the ground that's shiny can be used, just needed people to run across their paths. So as soon as people found it, whether it's in the Americas or in the Middle East or in Europe or Asia or Africa, or even Australia, you just need people who can spot it. The idea is already there. Now, once those easily accessible deposits of native copper had been exhausted, humans had to extract the metal from copper-bearing ores. The central alpine region that was home to Otzi the Iceman is rich in copper-bearing ores, which are the things you actually dig out of the ground. You don't dig metals out of the ground, you dig ores and then get the metal out of the ore. That region was also the center of a thriving Chalcolithic civilization, Copper Age civilization. And one theory is that Otzi was on a prospecting trip for copper ores when he met his end in the High Alps. Extracting copper from ore is a far more complex process than just prospecting for copper nuggets lying on the ground. It is probable that humans discovered rocks were a source of copper and other metallic elements when they crushed and heated colored mineral ores to use as pigments and decorative glazes for pottery. So in the service of art, technology was increased, and eventually understanding was increased. Very often, beauty will drive technology, which will then drive science. Science is not the starting point for a lot of these things. Once the copper-bearing ores had been extracted from the ground, they had to be crushed and smelted, which means basically melted, in charcoal furnaces at over 1,000 degrees Celsius, almost 2,000 Fahrenheit. And that had to be done several times to remove the impurities and produce rough blocks of the pure copper, which was done right there at the mining site. Those blocks of copper would then be transported to settlements for further processing or traded directly with other communities. Now, copper is relatively soft for a metal and can be worked into small objects, such as beads and pins, by cold hammering. But the technique is not suitable for larger objects because the metal will crack. So the first technological stage is to heat the copper to make it easier to work. But more complex objects need to be made by casting. What would happen is the copper blocks would be melted in ceramic or metal containers and then poured into stone or clay molds, and then finished by cold hammering. The axe blade that they found with Otzi, the Iceman, that blade was cast in such a way, and with the cutting and shaping done by cold hammering after it was filled into the mold. The social and cultural changes wrought by the Metal Age were far-reaching. By the Metal Age, we're talking about between the Neolithic and the modern ages, so copper, bronze, and iron. They were far-reaching. On the outside, externally, it obliged communities to interact with one another as never before. Internally, it encouraged the development of proto-writing systems as a means to keep records of production, ownership, and commercial transactions. It began a process of social stratification that would lead to the division of society into different castes or classes. There would be specialist craftsmen, and a political, social, and economic elite, and their subordinates. As we'll learn in the next chapter about bronze, copper continued to be a central material in the early development of human civilization as one of the main ingredients in the first alloy to be made by humans, which was bronze. Thank you, and have a good day.